Hey, what's up guys? It is your girl, Coach LeighAnn, down here at LeighAnn Fitness in Plainville. Today we are going to be talking about hip mobility. So typically when we talk about hip mobility, the things that we focus on are ways to stretch the hips. What we're going to be talking about today is actually activation of other muscles to provide you with more hip mobility. So typically if we find that we've been spending a lot of time stretching our hips but we haven't seen any more improvement in things like our squat, it probably means that our hips aren't actually tight. So what can happen is if other muscles are not doing the job that they're supposed to, for example, the obliques, the abs, the lats, the psoas in the hips, things like that, if those muscles are underactive and they're not doing the job that they're supposed to, what they're supposed to do is to stabilize the spine for you when you're in things like a squat. If they're not stabilizing your spine, if they're not turned on properly, what can happen is that other muscles in the hips and surrounding areas can actually tighten up to try to compensate for that, to try to give you that same stability in the spine when you're squatting. But what that does is it limits the range of motion that you have in your hips. So that still creates that illusion of that hip tightness. So what we're going to talk about today is how to find out whether or not you actually have tightness in your hips, or if what you have is underactivity in other muscles that are supposed to be providing you with stability. So I'm going to take you through a couple of hip mobility assessments, and then we're going to talk about how to activate the muscles if it turns out that it's actually underactivity. All right, so stick around and I'll explain it all. All right guys, so I'm going to walk you through the very first hip test, and this is known as the Thomas test. So we're just going to get ourselves set up on some steps. So here I have two steps set up for myself. If you're doing this at home, you can do it on a bed or something like that. What we're doing in the Thomas test is we're just looking to see if we have tightness in our TFL, our psoas, our rectus femoris. We don't necessarily need to get super technical about it. It's just good for you to have some kind of background knowledge that this is what the Thomas test does. And we're just looking for general tightness in our hips. So we get ourselves set up on the steps. Now if you are using a bed or something at home, we just want to make sure that our feet aren't touching the ground. So I'm going to get myself set up kind of mid-leg or so on the edge of it. And I have my head supported, so that's why I have two steps right now so that I can support my head. If you're on a bed at home, not a huge issue for you. So the first thing we want to do is pull our knees into our chest. So you'll find if you just softly pull your legs in, you come to a nice natural stopping point. If I pull my legs in too far, you'll see that I lifted my hips up. And if I don't pull them in far enough, everything's a little bit too relaxed. So we want to get to about 20 degrees away from us to start. The first thing we're going to look at is the knee. So I'm just going to let one leg come down and I'm going to keep the other leg up into my chest. What I want to look at is whether or not my knee can get to about 100 degrees, maybe even 90 degrees. So if I can get to this position pretty well, it means I don't have tightness in my hips. If I'm getting, the leg comes up more to closer to 180 degrees, or I'm getting too far away from that 90 degrees, typically what that indicates is that you do have some kind of tightness in the rectus femoris, which is in your hips. The second part that we want to look at is how close our leg is to the step. So with a bent leg, can I get my leg relatively close to the step, or am I in this position? So if the leg is coming up, that typically tends to indicate tightness. Now I can also test this same muscle group, the psoas, with a straight leg. So I take the rectus femoris out of it, and I might find that maybe I have a little bit more depth here as well. So that might indicate, tightness in one place or another. But really, we just want to look at both of these things. In any one of these positions, can I get my knee to about 90 degrees? Can I get my leg relatively flat to the table with a bend or with a straight leg? And if for the most part it seems like my leg's pretty flat, my knee's pretty close to 90 degrees, then that tells us that we really aren't looking at much tightness in our hips. So that's a good indication for us. All right, so if you tested that out and you find that your hips aren't tight, then it's time to move on to the next test, and I will show you what that is. All right guys, test number 2. So we went through our general hip mobility test by laying on the step. So if we found that we had hip tightness, either we couldn't get our knee to 90 degrees or we couldn't get our leg flat on the table in either position, then that means that we need to go back and keep stretching our hips. But if we found that we had good hip mobility there, then we need to progress to this one, which is now testing our hip internal and our external rotation. And this is where we find the tightness, and this is where we figure out what activation it is that we need for ourselves. So I'm sitting up on my steps, or if I'm at home and I'm on my bed, I'm setting myself up on my bed. So we want to make sure again that the feet aren't resting on the ground. I want everything to be nice and relaxed. So the first thing I'm going to test is hip internal rotation. So I'm actually going to bring the foot away from me because I'm internally rotating my hip, which lets the leg come away from me. So I check one side, I check the other. What I'm aiming for is probably about 20 to 30 degrees, maybe even 45 if you have really good hip mobility. What I want to find is, you know, super tight. Like, can I only get to maybe 10 degrees? If I'm finding that this is, you know, as far as I can go, then that to me probably indicates that I have bad hip internal rotation. We're just looking for those serious cases. So again, if you can only get to about here, if you're here, this is totally fine. You know, again, 20, 30, 45 degrees, somewhere in there, totally fine. We're then gonna test our external rotation. So now I'm gonna bring the foot in towards me. So again, I'm opening up the hip, I'm rotating the hip externally. Can I get my leg 20, 30 degrees, maybe even 45? Let's check the other side. Can I get the leg 20, 30, 45 degrees? And I might find one side's tighter than the other too, and that's also a really good indication for me as well. It doesn't have to be that both hips have bad internal or external rotation. You're probably gonna find that we're tighter on one side than the other, and that's okay. That's really good for you to know. That's another reason that we wanna do these tests, so that I can see what my inconsistencies are from one side to the other. So go ahead and run this test. Pay attention, you know, let's see if we have trouble with our internal or their external rotation. From there, then I'm gonna show you what your activation is gonna look like, so stick around. All right, guys, here it is, the last part, the activation piece. So if we found that we had tightness in our hips, we're moving on to our activation component instead of our stretching component. So we tested for internal rotation. That's the one where our foot came out to the side and we tested our hip internally rotating. So if we found that that was where we had tightness, what we're gonna do is come into a side plank on that side. So if I had bad internal rotation on my left leg, then I'm gonna come onto my left side. So what I wanna do with my side plank is to activate my lats, my obliques, the serratus anterior and the psoas on that side, because what that tells me that I have that limited internal rotation is that, the muscles, the ones that I just mentioned, are typically underactive. So if I get myself into a side plank, I'm gonna activate those muscles. So now when I come into things like a squat, then I should have better hip mobility because my hips have loosened up. They're not taking over for these muscles that are underactive. I activate these, they're gonna do the job that they're supposed to, which is to stabilize my spine. My hips can loosen up and therefore I have more hip mobility. So for my side plank, I want you to just start on the knee because we're just looking for activation. We're not trying to work out super hard. You probably know that you can do a full-on side plank and you can add, rotations. You could do all these kinds of things. I don't care about that right now. All I want you to do is focus as hard as you can on squeezing these muscles as hard as you possibly can to turn them up. So we're gonna kick one leg back behind us so my knee's at about 90 degrees. I can straighten out the other leg. My elbow is directly underneath my shoulder and I have my hand out in front of me. So then from there, I lift the hip up. Now from here, we have to be 100% perfect in our side plank. So I have to make sure that my shoulder is staying out of my neck. I have to make sure that my hip's not coming up too high and it's not dropping too low. I have to make sure that I am tucking my hips, so I'm squeezing my glutes and I'm squeezing all of these muscles. So I should really feel those obliques turn on. I should feel my lats turn on. I should feel my serratus turn on. I should feel all of these muscles become active. So we're gonna lock and hold this for probably about 10 seconds or so. We're gonna keep that hand right on the hip. My head is neutral. I'm not letting it drop. I'm not looking at the ground. I'm picking a spot right in front of me and I'm just locking and holding. So we're gonna hold for about 10 seconds. We'll drop, rest for about 5 seconds, come back up, do another set of 10. And we can do this for anywhere from 3 to 5 sets just to try to get that side activated. We would prefer to do this rather than doing like a 30-second interval because we don't want to tire out the muscles. We're trying to turn them on. So we just want 10 seconds to get them active, get them turned on, know what it feels like to use them, let them take a breather, activate them again so that they're turned on again, and then continue doing that. And if we find that we were limited on both sides, we're gonna do a side plank on both sides. If it was just the one side that was tight, we just wanna do that one side. If what we found was that external rotation was our problem, where the foot coming in toward us and the hip rotating externally, if that was our problem, we wanna activate the muscles on the front of the body. So we're actually just gonna bring it into your regular old plank. So we're gonna do it on the elbows, and again, we can start on the knees. So either one of these we can progress, if we're doing the side plank, we can progress it to the feet. But again, because we just want to turn the muscles on, we don't need to, do that the hardest possible way that we can. So again, make sure elbows directly underneath our shoulders. My hands are not touching. I want to keep them apart. I'm going to focus my eyes right between my palms. So I'm not looking in front of me. I'm not looking at my knees. I'm locked out here. So then from here, I lock it up. I'm making sure that my hips are tucked. I don't have that curve in my spine. I'm squeezing my abs as tight as I can. I'm squeezing my glutes as tight as I possibly can, because these are the muscles that I need to turn on. You're squeezing for dear life. We're cracking some walnuts, we're making some diamonds, and we're just holding on as tight as we possibly can for, again, about 10 seconds or so. We come down, we rest for another 5 seconds or so. We come back up and we do it again. Maybe we get to the point where we progress to here. If I can feel like I'm turning on my glutes even better, then that's a good position for me to be in. So go ahead and give that a shot. Try it out and then retest to see how your hip internal and external rotation has progressed, to see that, you know, the mobility that you had in your hips got better. And then from there, go ahead and squat. Go ahead and check it out and see how it goes. So if you have any questions on how to do any of the tests or how any of your activation exercises should go, you can go ahead and ask any one of your coaches. Otherwise, give it a shot and let's see how those squats look.